The Great Pyramid of Giza and the Pyramid of the Sun in Mexico share an eerie architectural resemblance. How could builders separated by an ocean and thousands of years design such similar monuments? This is the core of a profound historical mystery, one that points to hidden knowledge networks linking ancient builders across continents. By the end of this exploration, your understanding of human history will be fundamentally reshaped. We will examine shared astronomical alignments, identical geometric codes, and construction secrets that defy the story of isolated civilizations. Were these ideas carried by forgotten sea voyages or encoded in myths passed down through generations? The evidence suggests our ancestors were part of a global conversation far earlier than we ever believed. What does it mean for our past if the ancient world was already deeply connected? Run your hand along the sun-warmed stone of a wall at Machu Picchu, and your fingers trace the contours of a puzzle. Each massive block is a unique, irregular polygon, yet it locks perfectly with its neighbors, a three-dimensional jigsaw of staggering weight and precision. Now travel across the world to the ancient podium of Baalbek in Lebanon. Stand before stones so enormous they defy modern engineering, some weighing over 1,000 tons. Place your palm on their surface. The feeling is identical not just in scale but in technique. This is the first, most tangible clue in our investigation, a phenomenon we call megalithic construction. It is the art of building with colossal stones, often shaped into polygonal forms and fitted together so tightly that not even a blade of grass can slip between them. Experts call this ashlar masonry when the stones are finely dressed, or cyclopean walls when their size seems the work of mythical giants. From the Andes to the Aegean, from the Levant to ancient Japan, we find this same principle echoing through time and space. The question is immediate and profound. Why would cultures separated by continents and millennia all arrive at this immensely difficult, yet remarkably similar solution? Archaeologists like Dr. J. Brett Hill point to the staggering logistical challenge. Quarrying a single multi-hundred-ton block is a monumental task. Moving it across miles of rugged terrain without the wheel or modern machinery seems almost impossible. Then comes the most delicate phase, the dressing, where teams of workers would have to painstakingly chip and grind the stone to achieve those seamless, interlocking joints. The payoff, however, was immense. This style of construction creates structures of incredible seismic resilience. During an earthquake, a rigid wall of mortar and uniform bricks will crack and collapse. But a polygonal wall moves as a single, flexible unit, the stones shifting and settling without breaking apart. It is brilliant engineering. But did brilliant engineering have to be invented over and over again, in complete isolation? Look at the masterwork of the Inca at Sacsayhuaman, with stones that curve and nestle like liquid rock turned solid. Then examine the Lion Gate at Mycenae in Greece, built 1,000 years earlier and an ocean away. The visual and technical parallels are uncanny. Both used massive, roughly shaped limestone blocks fitted with meticulous care, creating fortifications meant to last for ages. This presents us with a fundamental choice. Is this a classic case of convergent evolution, where different cultures, faced with the same problem of building permanent, stable monuments, simply arrived at the same optimal solution? Or does the precision of the parallel suggest something more, like fragments of a shared technical manual, a common source of knowledge that drifted across the ancient world? To find an answer, we must look to the only highway that could have connected these distant builders, the vast and seemingly impassable blue wilderness, the ocean. The ocean was not a barrier but a highway. For the theory of maritime migrations to hold water, we must first dismantle a modern assumption that ancient people saw the sea as an impassable void. They did not. From the reed boats of the Indus Valley to the great sewn plank vessels of the Phoenicians, our ancestors were far more capable mariners than traditional history often credits. This pathway suggests that master builders themselves, or at the very least their precise geometric plans, could have been carried across the waves. Imagine a Bronze Age ship, its hull laden not just with obsidian and amber, but with something far more precious: knowledge. A seasoned architect holding the sacred ratios for temple construction, or a navigator with star charts that doubled as alignment diagrams, could have traveled from one coastal civilization to another, sharing the secrets of megalithic engineering. This is the theory of pre-Columbian transoceanic contact, not as a rare accident, but as a sporadic yet powerful vector for the diffusion of ideas. To understand its plausibility, we must look at the oceans themselves. Vast circular currents known as gyres act as natural conveyor belts. The Kuroshio Current sweeps up from Southeast Asia, past Japan, and across the North Pacific. The North Atlantic Gyre circulates between the Americas, Europe, and Africa. A vessel caught in these currents could, given enough time and survival, make a landfall on a distant continent. Anthropologist Dr. Alice Kehoe has long argued for the plausibility of such contacts, stating that the idea of completely isolated hemispheres is a myth born from 20th century academic tradition, not from the evidence. The evidence, in fact, is mounting. Take the legendary Kon-Tiki expedition led by Thor Heyerdahl in 1947. Using only materials and techniques available to pre-Columbian South Americans, he and his crew built a balsa wood raft and sailed it from Peru to the Tuamotu Islands in Polynesia, a journey of over 4,000 miles, proving that such a voyage was technologically possible. But this was a modern experiment. Ancient seafaring capabilities were often astounding. The Austronesian peoples, originating in Taiwan, used outrigger canoes and sophisticated navigation based on stars, wave patterns, and bird flight to settle islands across the entire Pacific, reaching as far as Madagascar and Easter Island by around 1200 AD. If they could navigate the world's largest ocean, could they not have reached the Americas? We find tantalizing potential contact points scattered across the archaeological record. Some scholars point to stylistic parallels between Olmec art in Mexico and artifacts from Shang Dynasty China, such as shared motifs of jade working and feline deities. Across the Pacific, the sweet potato provides a biological clue. This staple crop, native to South America, was found across Polynesia long before European contact. Its Polynesian name, Kumara, is strikingly similar to its Quechuan name in the Andes, Kumar. If a tuber could make that journey, carried either by people or by natural rafting, it stands to reason that people made the journey too. And where people go, ideas travel with them. This brings us to a reflective, pivotal question. If genetic markers, languages, and domesticated plants show clear transoceanic movement, why would architectural concepts be any different? A master stonemason's knowledge is a form of high-value intellectual cargo, perhaps even more enduring than pottery or textiles. This maritime hypothesis paints a picture of a world where knowledge flowed with the currents, where a shipwrecked sailor might teach a new community how to fit stones to withstand earthquakes, or where an entire crew, seeking a new home, would apply the building principles of their homeland to a new landscape. But to navigate those immense, featureless oceans, these ancient mariners would have needed a constant, unwavering guide. Their path was charted not on parchment, but in the night sky, by the same celestial patterns that their architectural monuments so meticulously encoded. That skyward connection was not just poetic inspiration, it was a precise and universal science. To stand at the entrance of Newgrange in Ireland on the winter solstice and witness the dawn light pierce the long, dark passage to illuminate the inner chamber is to feel a profound, shared human moment. That same feeling, that same precise alignment to the sun's rebirth, is echoed thousands of miles away at the Pyramid of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza, where the equinox sun casts a shadow of a serpent slithering down the staircase. This is not coincidence, it is conversation. It is the language of archaeoastronomy, the study of how ancient cultures understood the sky and embedded that knowledge into stone. Pioneering researchers like Dr. Anthony Aveni have spent decades documenting this celestial grammar, showing how solstices, equinoxes, and the risings of key stars provided a fixed, reliable calendar and a sacred blueprint for construction. The movements of the sun, moon, and stars were the only constants in a world of change, and aligning a temple to them was a way to harmonize human endeavor with the cosmic order. This practice creates startling parallels. Consider the great temple of Karnak in Egypt, its axis meticulously oriented so that on the summer solstice, the sun would rise directly along its central corridor, filling the sanctuary with light. Now travel to the Sun Temple at Mesa Verde in the American Southwest. Built by the ancestral Pueblones centuries later, its architecture is entirely different, yet its central tower was positioned to catch the first rays of the solstice sun, marking the turning of the year with the same celestial event. Even more compelling are the stellar alignments, particularly with the Pleiades star cluster. Known across cultures from the Greeks to the Maori, the heliacal rising of the Pleiades, their first appearance before dawn, often signaled the start of the agricultural year. This same cluster was used to orient temples in ancient Greece and, according to some scholars, to align the streets of Teotihuacan in Mexico. The most famous stellar correlation is the Orion theory for the Giza pyramids. The three main pyramids are arranged on the ground in a pattern that mirrors the three stars of Orion's belt. In ancient Egyptian mythology, Orion was associated with Osiris, the god of rebirth and the afterlife. Now cross the Atlantic. In Mesoamerican cosmology, the same patch of sky, often called the turtle or the hearth, was also associated with creation and the place of origins. The layout of certain ceremonial centers, like the three pyramids at Teotihuacan, has been suggested to reflect this same celestial pattern. This raises a breathtaking possibility. Could a shared, obsessive observation of the heavens be the root of a shared architectural grammar? Did builders from different continents, all gazing up at the same constellations, independently decide to map them onto the Earth in stone? Or does the consistency in which specific stars and solar events were chosen for alignment hint at a deeper, transferred tradition, a way of seeing the sky that was carried along with the techniques for building? This celestial language points to something even more fundamental than observation. It points to a hidden code, a silent, precise, and universal system of measurement that these builders all seem to understand. A knotted cord stretched between three stakes forms a perfect right angle, a fact known to ancient surveyors long before it bore a Greek name. This is the silent, precise language of sacred geometry, a design code whispered in stone across the globe. It suggests these builders weren't just stacking rocks, they were solving the same cosmic equation, embedding identical mathematical constants into their most revered structures. The most famous of these is pi, the ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter. In the Great Pyramid, the perimeter of its base divided by twice its height yields a figure astonishingly close to pi. But this number appears again in the dimensions of Stonehenge and in the circular layouts of ancient Mesoamerican ball courts. Then there is phi, approximately 1.618, known as the golden ratio. It appears in the spirals of seashells, the branching of trees, and famously in the growth pattern of the Fibonacci sequence. In architecture, it defines aesthetically pleasing proportions. The Parthenon in Greece fits neatly into a golden rectangle, and researchers argue the same ratio governs the floor plan of the Great Pyramid's King's Chamber. Even the square root of 2, an irrational number central to geometry, is found in the proportions of European cathedrals and the mandala grids used to design Hindu temples. Mathematician John Mitchell spent a lifetime documenting this phenomenon, calling it a forgotten science of number, weight, and measure that formed a common heritage of the ancient world. How were these complex ratios applied? One key technique was the squaring of the circle, a symbolic act of harmonizing the earthly square with the heavenly circle. The Great Pyramid's base perimeter is nearly equal to the circumference of a circle with a radius equal to its height. This same geometric puzzle appears in the layout of Glastonbury Abbey in England and in ancient Sanskrit texts. Another foundational shape is the vesica piscis, formed by the overlap of two circles of the same radius. This almond-shaped center was seen as a generative symbol, the womb of creation, and it forms the basis for the Christian fish symbol, the mandorla in sacred art, and the ground plans of many early temples. So we face a beautiful and profound mystery. Did cultures from Egypt to India to Central America, through deep meditation and observation of nature, all independently discover the same hidden mathematical order of the universe? Or does the specific, repeated application of pi and phi in monumental construction point to a transmitted curriculum, a set of sacred blueprints carried along the same routes as trade goods and star lore? This geometric thread does not exist in a vacuum. It is woven directly into the very symbols these builders carved and painted, a visual shorthand for their shared understanding of cosmic order. These geometric blueprints found their voice in the stories people told. Around that ancient fire, the storyteller did not just speak of heroes and monsters, he recited the operating manual of the universe. Myths and symbols became the most durable vessels for carrying complex knowledge across generations and continents. They were the cloud storage of the ancient world, preserving not just cultural values but potentially the very principles of engineering and astronomy. This is the realm of comparative mythology, where scholars like Joseph Campbell observed a common narrative thread he called the monomyth, or the hero's journey, found from Ireland to Indonesia. But beyond the hero's adventure lies an even more fundamental shared vocabulary, a symbolic language that directly translates into architectural form. Consider the concept of the axis mundi, the world tree. This is the central pillar of the cosmos, connecting the heavens, the earth, and the underworld. It is not merely a poetic idea. In architecture, it becomes the central pole of a Siberian shaman's tent, the towering spire of a Gothic cathedral, and most strikingly, the stepped pyramid. The ziggurats of Mesopotamia, the temples of Angkor Wat, and the pyramids of Mesoamerica all physically manifest this symbolic axis, a stone mountain allowing ritual ascent from the earthly realm toward the divine. The myth provides the why, and the architecture provides the how. Even more telling are myths that explicitly describe acts of measurement and foundation. In ancient Egypt, the crucial ceremony for founding a temple was called the stretching of the cord. The goddess Seshat, the divine scribe, would assist the pharaoh in using a cord to measure out and align the sacred precinct with the stars. This was not just ritual, it was a precise surveying technique encoded in sacred narrative. A similar idea appears in Hindu traditions where the god Vishnu, taking 3 strides, measures out the universe. These stories sanctify the practical geometry needed to build. This symbolic transmission often centered on specific, potent figures. Look at the serpent deity, a global symbol of wisdom, rebirth, and hidden knowledge. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, was a god of wind, learning, and the morning star. His temple, the Pyramid of the Feathered Serpent at Teotihuacan, is a monumental expression of this duality. In ancient Mesopotamia, we find Ningishzida, a serpent-bodied god associated with healing and the underworld, also a guardian of mystical secrets. The shared attributes are profound. Both are liminal beings, bridging earth and sky, death and renewal, and both are patrons of the esoteric arts. Could the reverence for such figures have traveled with the knowledge they represented, their iconography serving as a badge of identification for initiates in a widespread tradition of building? The most widespread myth of all may hold a clue to the very purpose of this monumental architecture, the story of the Great Flood. From the Epic of Gilgamesh to the biblical account of Noah, from Deucalion in Greek myth to Manu in Hindu texts, and across hundreds of indigenous American traditions, a cataclysmic deluge is a near-universal memory. Scholars debate its origins, often pointing to localized post-ice age sea level rises or catastrophic regional floods. But the cultural impact is clear. It instilled a deep desire to build things that would last, to create structures that could withstand or memorialize such overwhelming forces. This shared memory of cataclysm could directly explain the global drive toward megalithic, flood-resistant construction, building not just for the present, but as a bulwark against a remembered past. This leads us to a pivotal question. Could these enduring stories have functioned as sophisticated mnemonic devices? A complex geometric ratio or a precise astronomical alignment is difficult to memorize as a raw number. But embed it within a vivid story about a god measuring the heavens with a cord, or a hero navigating by the Pleiades, and the knowledge becomes unforgettable, passed down through song and ritual. The guardians of these stories were often specific, sometimes mobile groups, shamans, priest architects, or guilds of stonemasons. They were the keepers of the code. And if they could carry stories across mountain ranges, is it not conceivable that, in some ages, they also carried them across the sea? To trace that movement, we must look for a different kind of evidence, not in the stones they left behind, but in the very bones of the earth and the subtle, forgotten pathways they once walked. A master mason's toolkit held more than chisels and plumb lines. It contained a silent language. Across the ancient world, evidence points not to lone geniuses, but to organized fraternities, guilds of specialized builders who may have been the physical carriers of this profound knowledge. These were the itinerant artisans, the initiated craftsmen whose skills were so valuable they could travel between kingdoms, their expertise serving as a universal passport. Historians note the remarkable mobility of skilled workers in the Bronze Age and classical worlds. An architect from Greece might find employment in Persia. A metal worker from Anatolia could be prized in Egypt. This movement created a living network, a conduit through which advanced techniques in stoneworking, geometry, and celestial alignment could flow. We have names for some of these later groups. In the ancient Mediterranean, the Dionysian artificers were a legendary guild of architects and engineers associated with temple construction and mystery rites. Much later, the Freemasons would emerge, building upon a mythical history that traced their craft to the builders of Solomon's temple. While the direct historical links are debated, the model they represent is crucial. A secretive society bound by oath, ritual, and a guarded body of technical and philosophical knowledge. The power of such a guild lay in its trade secrets, knowledge so valuable it was protected by initiation rites and symbolic codes. This created a powerful system for transmission. A complex geometric formula or a technique for moving megaliths is difficult to write down and easily lost. But encode it within a ritual, a symbolic handshake, or a specific set of tool designs, and it becomes resilient, passed from master to apprentice across generations. These symbols could transcend language barriers. A mason's mark, a unique symbol carved into a finished stone block, is found from the quarries of ancient Egypt to the cathedrals of medieval Europe. While often a simple signature for payment, some recurring complex marks suggest something more, a signature of a particular school or tradition. The tools themselves became sacred objects. The square and compass, the plumb bob, the measuring cord, these were not just implements. They were emblems of cosmic order, representing truth, balance, and the alignment of the human with the divine. A guild member arriving at a new building site, perhaps unable to speak the local tongue, could demonstrate his affiliation and skill simply by displaying and using these tools in the recognized, ritualized manner. One of the most intriguing potential examples comes from Egypt with the mysterious priests of Ptah. Ptah was the god of craftsmen, architects, and creation itself, often depicted as a mummified figure holding a staff combining the symbols for life, stability, and dominion. His high priests at Memphis were likely the overseers of major state construction projects, the master architects behind the pyramids and temples. Some scholars, like the art historian John Anthony West, have speculated that this priestly college constituted a kind of secret society, custodians of a sacred geometry and building science that may have influenced traditions far beyond Egypt's borders. Could initiates from this college have traveled, taking contracts abroad and seeding their knowledge? It is a compelling possibility. When we see the same precision in stone fitting, the same obsession with solar alignment, and the same use of proportional geometry in distant lands, we might be seeing not just a shared idea, but the literal handiwork of a dispersed brotherhood. This reflection brings us to a deeper question. Did these fraternities maintain a continuous, clandestine tradition across the collapse of empires and the shifting of borders? Their survival and movement were often tied to the most powerful driver of human connection, the relentless flow of trade. A block of Armenian tuffstone rests in the foundation of a Mesopotamian ziggurat. This is not a theory, it is a physical fact, a piece of evidence you could hold in your hand. The movement of raw materials and luxury goods across vast distances provides the most concrete map of the ancient knowledge network we are tracing. These were not just trade routes for amber and ivory, they were the information superhighways of the Bronze Age, carrying the very tools and ideas that built civilizations. To understand this, we must follow the trail of specific commodities, each telling a story of connection. Obsidian, a volcanic glass prized for its razor-sharp edge, was traded from sources in Anatolia and the Aegean across the entire eastern Mediterranean. Archaeologists can trace a single blade back to its exact volcanic flow using chemical fingerprinting, proving it traveled hundreds of miles. Copper from Cyprus and tin from distant Cornwall in Britain were smelted together to create bronze, the alloy that defined an era. The tin trade alone, a metal essential for hardening copper, created a web of routes stretching from Central Asia to the Atlantic. Then there was lapis lazuli, that mesmerizing blue stone flecked with gold. The only known source in the ancient world was in the remote mountains of Afghanistan, yet it was found in the tombs of Egyptian pharaohs and in Sumerian royal jewelry. These journeys required organized, long-distance exchange, managed by merchants who knew foreign ports, languages, and markets, but they carried more than cargo. With every ingot of tin and every log of precious cedar timber from Lebanon, they carried news. They carried gossip from the royal courts, and crucially, they carried knowledge of the latest innovations. A merchant who knew the price of cedar in Egypt would also know that the Egyptian palace being built with that cedar featured a new style of column or a novel drainage system. The tools needed for megalithic construction themselves depended on this network. Working hard stones like granite or basalt requires even harder tools. The development of metal chisels, saws, and drills made precise stone dressing possible, and those metals came from this vast, interconnected trade system. One astonishing snapshot of this world was discovered off the coast of Turkey, the Uluburun shipwreck. Dating to the late 14th century BC, this vessel was a floating treasure chest and a cultural melting pot. Its cargo included copper ingots from Cyprus, tin, ebony from Africa, ivory, glass, and amber from the Baltic. Personal items belonged to men from Mycenaean Greece, Cyprus, Canaan, and Egypt. Here was a single ship, a microcosm of the entire Mediterranean trade network, with crew and goods from a dozen different cultures. It makes you wonder what conversations happened on that deck as they sailed under the stars. Did the Egyptian scribe compare hieroglyphs with the Mycenaean trader? Did they discuss the latest temple design in Ugarit or a new quarrying technique from Hattusa? The movement of materials made the movement of ideas not just possible but inevitable. If a ship captain had detailed sailing directions to find tin in the west, is it so hard to believe he also carried the geometric ratios for a stable foundation, knowledge as valuable as any metal? This tangible web of exchange points towards specific hubs, places where these global currents converged. One civilization, in particular, emerges from the mist as a prime candidate for being the great synthesizer and distributor of this ancient knowledge. The world of interconnected trade and shared knowledge did not last forever. Around 1200 BC, the entire system shattered. From the burning palaces of Mycenaean Greece to the sacked cities of the Hittite Empire and the besieged Nile Delta of Egypt, a wave of fire and chaos swept across the eastern Mediterranean. Ancient records speak in terrified tones of mysterious invaders from the sea, a confederation of tribes known only as the Sea Peoples. The Egyptian pharaoh Ramesses III immortalized his victory over them at Medinet Habu, his temple walls carved with scenes of epic naval battles against warriors with feathered headdresses fighting from sleek ships. For centuries, historians saw them as the ultimate barbarian destroyers, the catalyst for the late Bronze Age collapse that plunged the region into a centuries-long dark age. But what if that is only half the story? What if, amidst the undeniable violence, these enigmatic marauders were also carriers, not just of weapons, but of the very knowledge we have been tracing? This is one of history's most controversial and compelling puzzles. As archaeologist Eric H. Klein notes in his work on the collapse, it was not a single event but a perfect storm of interconnected disasters, including climate change, drought, earthquakes, internal rebellions, and yes, these mysterious external invasions. The traditional narrative is one of pure loss, a catastrophic forgetting, but new theories suggest a more complex process, a violent reorganization. Could some of the Sea Peoples have been displaced communities themselves, uprooted by the very climate shifts and famines that weakened the great empires? Among their numbers, might there have been skilled artisans, metalworkers, and builders, their homelands gone, now selling their expertise as mercenaries or refugees? The material evidence hints at this possibility. In the immediate aftermath of the collapse, a new technology begins to spread with remarkable speed: ironworking. The Hittites had once guarded the secrets of iron as a state monopoly. With their empire's fall, that knowledge appears to have diffused. The shift from bronze to iron was revolutionary, creating harder, more accessible tools and weapons. Could the disruptive movement of the Sea Peoples have been a vector for this diffusion, breaking old monopolies and scattering technical specialists? We see potential clues in the settlement patterns that follow the chaos. Take the Philistines, one of the named groups among the Sea Peoples according to Egyptian texts. They eventually settled on the coast of the Levant, in what is now Israel and Gaza. Their archaeological footprint is distinct and sophisticated. They brought with them a new style of pottery, elegantly decorated with geometric and bird motifs, completely different from local Canaanite styles. Their cities, like Ashkelon, show advanced urban planning and architectural techniques. They cultivated new crops like flax and had a dietary preference for pork, setting them apart culturally. This is not the crude material culture of simple destroyers. It is the signature of a complex society with its own advanced crafts. Could the Philistines and other groups have included master builders or stonemasons whose techniques influenced local construction in their new homes? The theory is provocative. It suggests that civilizational collapse, for all its terrible human cost, can sometimes act as a brutal accelerator for the spread of ideas. When central authority and guarded trade routes break down, people move in desperate, unpredictable ways. specialized knowledge holders from smiths to scribes to architects become displaced assets. Their survival may have depended on offering their unique skills to new patrons in new lands. This forced diaspora could have seeded pockets of innovation far from the old centers of power, explaining why certain architectural or technological concepts appear in disparate regions in the centuries following the collapse. It is a haunting reflection. Could the burning of a palace in Greece have indirectly contributed to the rise of a new building technique in the Levant? This period of chaotic, violent transmission stands in stark contrast to the next great chapter in the story of global connection, a network not born of collapse but of deliberate, expansive empire, the Silk Road. Silk and spices were only the surface trade. Beneath the camel's feet and the merchant's ledgers flowed a deeper, more enduring currency, the blueprint for a dome, the geometry of an arch, the very shape of sacred space. This was the Silk Road as an intellectual network, a continental dialogue in stone and mortar that reshaped skylines from Spain to Japan. Historians like Peter Frankopan have reframed our view of these routes, showing they were less a single road and more a pulsating web for the exchange of technologies, philosophies, and artistic forms. At a crowded caravanserai in Samarkand, under a vaulted roof that itself was an innovation, a traveler from Byzantium might witness Persian builders using a novel triangular corner piece called a squinch to support a round dome on a square base. That sketch in his notebook could travel west, eventually influencing the domed churches of his homeland. This was knowledge migration in real time. The movement of specific architectural elements tells this story with clarity. Consider the pointed arch. While often associated with the soaring Gothic cathedrals of medieval Europe, its origins for large-scale construction lie further east in Sasanian Persia and earlier. It was a stronger, more flexible form than the rounded Roman arch. Through trade and cultural contact, likely filtered through the Islamic architecture of Al-Andalus in Spain and the Crusader encounters in the Levant, this Persian form traveled to Europe. There, master masons seized upon it, using the pointed arch to create the ribbed vaults and flying buttresses that allowed walls to become breathtaking windows of stained glass, transforming the very experience of light and faith. This was not copying, it was creative adaptation, a technology answering a new spiritual and aesthetic need. Similarly, the Buddhist stupa, a hemispherical mound housing relics, began in ancient India as a simple earthen mound. As Buddhism spread along the Silk Road, carried by monks and supported by merchant patrons, the stupa transformed. In Central Asia, it gained a tall, cylindrical base. In China, it evolved into the pagoda, a multi-tiered tower with distinctive curved eaves. Each culture interpreted the core symbolic form, the mountain axis of the world, through its own architectural language, yet the genealogical line is unmistakable. This transmission relied on key nodal cities, cosmopolitan melting pots where ideas cross-pollinated. Baghdad, under the Abbasid Caliphate, became a global center of learning, its house of wisdom translating Greek, Persian, and Indian texts. Here, mathematical and engineering knowledge was synthesized and disseminated. Chang'an, the magnificent capital of Tang Dynasty China, hosted communities of Sogdian, Persian, and Turkish traders, alongside Buddhist monks from India and Nestorian Christians from Syria. In such a city, a temple design could be studied, adapted, and carried onward in multiple directions. This raises a reflective question. How did the universal needs of different religions actually help propagate these architectural forms? Buddhism, Islam, and Christianity all required spaces for congregation, for ritual, and for inspiring awe. The architectural solutions to these needs, whether a clear span for prayer, a path for circumambulation, or a vertical reach toward the divine, proved remarkably transferable. A structural innovation developed for a mosque, like the Muqarnas honeycomb vaulting for decorating domes, could be admired by a Christian artisan and adapted for a palace chapel. The form traveled not as a religious icon, but as a brilliant solution to a shared engineering and artistic challenge. This vast Eurasian exchange of the classical and medieval eras finds a profound parallel story in the pre-Columbian Americas, where a different kind of road carried its own sacred geometry across mountains and jungles. The conquistadors wrote of a story that chilled them to the core. As they pushed into the heart of Mexico and Peru, they heard, again and again, a prophecy from the people they sought to conquer. It spoke of a bearded, pale-skinned god who had arrived long ago from across the Eastern Sea. This was not a minor deity, but a civilizing hero who taught the people agriculture, architecture, laws, and morality. Then he promised to return one day. His names were many: Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, in Mexico, Cuculcan among the Maya, and Viracocha, the foam of the sea, in the Andes. To the Spanish, this seemed like divine providence, a sign their conquest was preordained. To modern scholars, it is one of history's most tantalizing and contentious puzzles. Are these white god legends merely archetypal myths, a common human story of a culture bringer, or could they be a cultural memory, however distorted, of real trans-Pacific contact? This question sits at the fiery center of the diffusionist debate, which argues for pre-Columbian connections between the Old World and the New. Its most famous champion was the adventurer Thor Heyerdahl, who stated, "The possibility of diffusion has been systematically underestimated." He built his Kon-Tiki raft to prove a point that South Americans could have reached Polynesia. But the evidence he and others point to is not just about sea travel, it is etched in stone and metal. They highlight artistic parallels that are difficult to dismiss as pure coincidence. In the art of the ancient Maya, a motif appears of a figure seated in a cross-legged position, often holding a small tray, with their head turned to the side in a very specific, almost contemplative pose. This is the Chacmol, a well-known Mesoamerican ritual figure. Strikingly similar poses are found in ancient Buddhist art from India and Southeast Asia, depicting ascetics or celestial beings. The specific head turn, the hand position, the overall composition, the visual echo is uncanny. Could this pose have traveled across the Pacific, or is it a posture so naturally human that it emerged independently in sacred art worlds apart? The architectural parallels are even more structural. The stepped pyramid is a global phenomenon, from the ziggurats of Mesopotamia to the temples of Angkor Wat to the pyramids of Teotihuacan. The diffusionist argument asks, is the basic form of a mountain made of stacked platforms such an obvious idea that every culture invented it separately? Or does the addition of specific, complex features suggest a shared blueprint? Look at the use of metal clamps. At the mysterious site of Tiahuanaco in Bolivia, builders used unique copper arsenic clamps, shaped like a capital I, to hold massive stone blocks together. They poured molten metal into pre-carved channels where it solidified, locking the stones. This exact same technique, with strikingly similar I-shaped clamps, was used in ancient Greek construction, such as at the Parthenon, and in ancient Egyptian obelisks. The technological parallel is precise and sophisticated. Skeptical archaeologists, however, urge extreme caution. They point out that human minds, faced with similar engineering problems, often arrive at similar solutions. This is the principle of convergent evolution. A stepped pyramid is a stable way to build tall with stone. Metal clamps are a logical method for reinforcing masonry. The lotus motif, a symbol of purity and rebirth, could easily arise independently in cultures that value water lilies. They argue that focusing on isolated similarities ignores the vast and fundamental differences in language, writing systems, pottery styles, and overall cultural context between these civilizations. The debate often becomes a clash of worldviews. One side sees a human past rich with unexpected connections, a web of voyages and exchanges that traditional history has overlooked. The other sees a profound respect for the innovative power of isolated human societies, each capable of genius without outside help, so we are left with a haunting reflection. Are Quetzalcoatl and Viracocha purely mythological constructs, symbolic representations of wind, water, and wisdom? Or could they be the cultural memory of a rare, perhaps catastrophic, visit from across the Pacific by shipwrecked Asian mariners or a lost fishing fleet, whose advanced skills in building or metalwork left an indelible mark on local legend? The truth may lie somewhere in the murky middle, a place of sporadic, accidental contact rather than planned colonization. But if such visitors came, they brought more than stories. They may have brought a science of sound, a hidden layer of purpose within the stones that speaks not to the eyes but to the ears. The stones themselves were designed to sing. Step into the subterranean oracle chamber of the Hypogeum in Malta, a labyrinth carved from solid limestone over 5,000 years ago. Speak in a low tone and your voice does not just echo, it transforms, swelling into a deep, resonant hum that seems to vibrate through your very bones. Now travel across the Atlantic and stand before the Temple of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza. Clap your hands once at the base of the staircase, and the sound that returns is not a simple echo, but the perfect, ethereal chirp of the sacred Quetzal bird. These are not acoustic accidents. They are masterpieces of a forgotten science, the field of archaeoacoustics, which studies how ancient cultures intentionally shaped sound. Researchers like Dr. Stephen J. Waller have demonstrated that many sacred sites, from rock art panels in the American Southwest to the stone circles of Europe, possess specific acoustic properties. The placement of paintings often corresponds with spots of maximum echo or reverberation, suggesting sound was an integral part of the ritual experience. This reveals a layer of sophistication often missed, a shared understanding that architecture was not just for the eyes but for the ears. The principles they used were based on careful empirical observation. By shaping a chamber in a specific way, they could control how sound waves behaved. A parabolic curve, like the interior of some domes or niches, can focus sound waves to a single point, creating a whispering gallery where a murmur spoken at one focus can be heard clearly at the other, even across a large space. We see this in the Maya site of Palenque, in the Temple of the Inscriptions, where the design may have allowed priests to project their voices as if from the tomb of the ruler Pakal himself. Another technique involves the use of materials and textures. A smooth, hard surface like polished limestone reflects sound sharply, creating clear echoes. A rough, porous surface absorbs and deadens it. By combining these surfaces strategically, ancient acoustic engineers could filter specific frequencies, allowing only certain tones to resonate. In some Neolithic passage tombs, like Newgrange in Ireland, the construction creates what physicists call a Helmholtz resonator effect. The chamber acts like the body of a bottle, with the narrow entrance passage as the neck. When sound of the right frequency enters, the entire space hums in sympathy, amplifying it powerfully. This would have made chants or ritual drumming feel supernatural, as if the earth itself were joining in. Perhaps the most stunning acoustic demonstration is at the Great Ball Court at Chichen Itza. This immense playing field, flanked by towering parallel walls, is a giant sound channel. A word spoken softly at one end can be heard with perfect clarity at the other, over 140 meters away. Even more remarkably, a hand clap or shout produces a series of distinct, cascading echoes that number researchers have linked to the sacred count of the Maya calendar. This was clearly intentional, turning a sporting arena into a vast instrument for ritual communication. So we must ask, could the science of sacred sound have been a transferable technology? The principles of reverberation, amplification, and frequency are based on universal physics. A builder who understood that a corbelled vault created a certain resonance, or that a plaster finish on a wall would brighten a chant, possessed knowledge as valuable as any geometric ratio. This knowledge could travel, tested and refined in each new temple. It connects the human desire to commune with the unseen not through sight alone, but through the enveloping, physical presence of sound. This mastery over the sensory environment extended to another fundamental element, the lifeblood of civilization, which ancient builders learned to command with equal ingenuity. Water is the architect of civilization. It carves canyons, nourishes crops, and dictates where a city can rise. To control water was to control life itself, and from this universal need emerged a global symphony of engineering genius. Historian Dr. Charles Ortloff notes that the mastery of hydraulics was often the very foundation of early state power, enabling the surplus food and stable populations that make complex societies possible. What we see across the ancient world is a breathtaking array of solutions to the same fundamental problems: how to bring clean water in, how to drain floodwater out, and how to store it for times of drought. In the deserts of Persia, engineers developed the Qanat, a gently sloping underground tunnel that tapped into mountain aquifers and guided water for miles to arid plains and cities, all by the silent, relentless pull of gravity. 1,000 years later and a world away, the Maya of Central America built intricate filtration systems at sites like Tikal, using limestone sand and zeolite minerals to purify their water supply in settling tanks, a sophisticated understanding of chemistry and public health. In the arid landscapes of India, communities constructed breathtaking stepwells, monumental inverted temples that descended deep into the earth to reach the water table. These were not mere wells, they were social hubs, cool retreats, and feats of precise stonework, each step a testament to managing a precious resource. The parallels are profound, but are they evidence of connection or simply brilliant minds arriving at similar answers? The principle of gravity needs no passport, it is a universal law. Any culture observing that water flows downhill could devise channels and aqueducts. The need for clean water would naturally lead to filtration methods. This is the compelling case for parallel invention, driven by inescapable environmental necessity. Yet, within these independent solutions, we find intriguing overlaps in execution. Consider the concept of waterproof cement. The Romans famously used a formula involving volcanic ash to create concrete that could set underwater. Centuries earlier, the Minoans on the island of Crete used a mixture of gypsum to line their elaborate palace plumbing at Knossos, a system that included terracotta pipes, flush toilets, and graceful fountains that brought the sound and sight of fresh water into the heart of the court. This wasn't just utility, it was a display of mastery over nature, a theme repeated in the ornamental fountains of Petra and the reflecting pools of Anchor. The management of water also required a deep understanding of time, of seasonal rains and long-term drought cycles. To predict the Nile's flood, Egyptian priests watched the stars. To capture the brief monsoon rains, stepwell builders in India designed vast subterranean reservoirs. This synchronization of engineering with celestial and seasonal cycles hints at a shared intellectual framework, where controlling water meant harmonizing with the larger rhythms of the cosmos. So we are left with a reflective question. While the basic need for water explains the global emergence of hydraulics, could the most successful and elegant solutions have traveled? If a merchant from Persia described the marvel of a Qanat to an engineer in the Levant, would that not inspire adaptation? If tales of Minoan palace plumbing circulated in Mediterranean ports, might they influence later Greek and Roman systems? The movement of ideas about water may have been as fluid as the resource itself, flowing along the same trade routes that carried spices and silks, blending local innovation with inspired adaptation from afar. This mastery over the physical world of water and stone ultimately served a purpose greater than mere survival. It was directed toward a single, staggering goal: to build a machine that could stop time itself. The cornerstone of a pyramid was not laid on a whim, but on a day calculated by the stars. For ancient builders, time itself was the ultimate blueprint, a complex, cyclical framework that dictated when to plant, when to celebrate, and when to build for eternity. This mastery of calendars, of tracking the sun, moon, and planets across generations, may be the most profound knowledge network of all, a shared language of time that enabled monumental planning across continents. The work of scholars like Dr. Michael D. Coe reveals that for civilizations from Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica, calendars were not mere tools. They were the very architecture of reality, governing agriculture, ritual, and the legitimacy of kings. To control the calendar was to mediate between the people and the cosmos, and the structures they built were the physical anchors of this celestial order. At the heart of this system was the solar year, that fundamental cycle of approximately 365 days observed by nearly every agricultural society. From the Egyptian calendar that heralded the Nile's flood to the Roman Julian reforms, tracking the sun's journey was essential for survival. But the true sophistication lies in how cultures layered additional, sacred cycles atop this solar base. In Mesoamerica, the Maya developed an intricate, interlocking system. Their 260-day sacred calendar, the Tzolk'in, was a continuous count of days combining 20-day names with 13 numbers. This was not tied to any astronomical cycle we readily recognize today, yet it held profound ritual significance governing ceremonies and divinations. Alongside it ran the Hob, a 365-day solar calendar of 18 months with 20 days each, plus a short, unlucky period of 5 days. The convergence of these two cycles, the Tzolk'in and the Hob, created a larger 52-year cycle known as the calendar round. This was a period of immense ceremonial importance, a time when the world was believed to renew itself, and often when temples themselves were renewed. We see this etched in stone. At sites like Capon, archaeological evidence suggests major phases of construction and renovation were timed to coincide with the completion of these 52-year cycles. A temple platform would be expanded, a new facade erected over the old, physically layering the architecture in rhythm with the sacred count of time. This reflects a worldview where construction was not a one-time act, but a perpetual act of renewal, mirroring the cyclical rebirth of time itself. This concept finds echoes far from the Maya world. In ancient India, vast cycles of time known as yugas governed cosmic eras. In China, the 60-year cycle of the heavenly stems and earthly branches organized history and state ritual. While different in scale, these systems share a fundamental principle. Time is not a straight line but a wheel, and human endeavor must align with its turning. To track such vast cycles required long-term record-keeping. The Mayas' most famous innovation was the long count, a linear count of days from a mythological starting point, which allowed them to place any event within a grand, continuous timeline spanning thousands of years. This enabled dynastic histories to be recorded on stelae with precise dates, anchoring a king's reign to the cosmic order. The need for such precision forced calendar keepers to solve a universal problem: the fact that the solar year is not exactly 365 days. That extra quarter day each year causes calendars to drift against the seasons. Cultures worldwide developed intercalation, the insertion of extra days or months to realign the calendar. The Romans added a leap month, the Maya had their 5 unlucky days, and later the Gregorian calendar refined the leap year system. This shared challenge and its varied solutions highlight a global community of priest astronomers, all observing, calculating, and correcting to keep their sacred timelines true. So we must reflect: if two cultures, worlds apart, both conceive of time as a sacred, measurable cycle, and both use that cycle to dictate the very moment a temple's foundation is laid. What does that imply? It suggests that the knowledge required to build was inseparable from the knowledge required to mark time. A master builder was also a keeper of the calendar. This shared conception of cyclical time could have provided a universal framework for knowledge transfer. A visiting astronomer from one land could communicate with a priest in another not through language, but through the shared grammar of celestial movements and ritual counts. The calendar was the common code, and the monuments were its permanent physical expression. This long-term, cyclical planning required not just intellectual knowledge, but a societal engine capable of sustaining projects across generations, an engine often powered by a single, unifying force, a ruler whose very identity was woven into the cosmic fabric they sought to build. A spiral carved into a stone block in ancient Scotland is an echo of the same spiral found on a temple wall in distant Anatolia. These are not words, but they speak volumes. This brings us to a fascinating layer of the mystery, the puzzle of inscriptions and non-verbal communication. Beyond the grand architecture, we find a quieter, more personal language etched into the stones themselves, a potential system of symbolic blueprints used by builders across the world. These marks take many forms, from the mason's mark, a simple chevron or cross used as a signature, to the enigmatic petroglyphs and geoglyphs carved into rock faces or shaped into vast landscapes. Scholars of semiotics, the study of signs and symbols, note that certain basic shapes possess a near universal resonance. A circle can represent the sun, a cycle, or unity. A spiral might signify journey, growth, or cosmic energy. A labyrinth could map a ritual path or the underworld. For ancient builders, these symbols may have functioned as a practical, non-linguistic notation. A specific mark might denote the quarry origin of a stone, ensuring blocks from the same geological layer were grouped together for consistent weathering. Another symbol could indicate the assembly sequence, like a numbered part in a modern flat-pack furniture manual, showing which block fit where in the complex puzzle of a polygonal wall. A third mark might be an alignment guide, a directional arrow or celestial marker to ensure the stone was oriented correctly within the sacred geometry of the temple. Cataloging these recurring symbols reveals a startling pattern. Cup and ring marks, a central depression surrounded by concentric circles, appear from the British Isles to India. The labyrinth motif, a single winding path to a center, is found on Minoan coins, in Scandinavian rock art, and in Native American traditions. The spiral, perhaps the most widespread of all, graces Newgrange in Ireland, the temples of Malta, and the pottery of the ancient American Southwest. These parallels invite us to consider a radical idea. Could the first true writing systems have emerged not from recording speech, but from the practical notation systems of builders and artisans? The transition from a symbol meaning this stone goes here to a symbol representing a specific sound or word is a profound leap, but the foundation may have been laid in the quarry and the construction yard. One of the most controversial pieces of this puzzle comes from Peru, the Ica stones. These carved andesite rocks, whose authenticity is heavily debated, depict scenes that shock modern viewers, showing humans alongside what appear to be dinosaurs, advanced medical procedures, and sophisticated technology. Setting aside the fierce controversy over their origin, they serve as a provocative thought experiment. If such depictions were genuine ancient artifacts, they would represent a catastrophic disconnect between the symbolic language of the carvers and the conventional narrative of history. They would be a stark reminder of how completely a non-verbal, symbolic record can be misunderstood once the key to its code is lost. This reflection brings us to a core question. If these symbols formed a global builder's lexicon, how was it transmitted? We have traced the potential routes of people and ideas, but to find irrefutable evidence of connection, we must look beyond the stones and into the very code of life itself, to the silent history written in human DNA. The silent history written in our DNA is beginning to speak. In laboratories around the world, scientists are now reading the genetic code extracted from ancient bones, not merely to trace family trees, but to map the epic journeys of prehistoric populations and correlate those movements with sudden leaps in technology found in the ground. This is the revolutionary field of archaeogenetics, and it is providing a parallel biological narrative to the one told by stones and symbols. Groundbreaking research from institutes like the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology has revealed that prehistory was not a static age of isolated tribes, but a dynamic era of large-scale migrations, pulses of people moving across continents and seas, reshaping the genetic and cultural landscape. By analyzing the DNA of individuals who lived thousands of years ago, researchers can now track the spread of specific genetic lineages, known as haplogroups, with astonishing precision. And when these genetic maps are laid over the archaeological record, fascinating patterns emerge. Consider the spread of megalithic tombs across coastal Europe, from the Iberian Peninsula to Scandinavia. Archaeogenetic studies suggest this monumental tradition may have been carried not by a vague diffusion of ideas, but by the actual movement of people, seafaring groups whose distinct genetic signature traveled with them along the Atlantic fringe. Similarly, the breathtaking expansion of the Lapita culture across the remote islands of the Pacific, a journey marked by their distinctive pottery, is vividly mirrored in the genetic trail of their descendants. The people and their cultural toolkit moved as one. This genetic evidence offers a powerful new lens, but it has important limitations. Genes track the movement of people, of biological ancestry. They do not, by themselves, tell us what those people knew or believed. A migration could bring new languages, new gods, and new ways of building, or it could simply be a movement of families joining existing communities. The link between a haplogroup and a building technique is not automatic. It is a correlation that demands careful interpretation. A compelling illustrative example lies in one of the America's earliest and most sophisticated technologies, the Clovis point. These beautifully fluted spear points, dating back over 13,000 years, represent a sudden, advanced lithic technology across North America. For decades, archaeologists debated their origin. Recent genetic studies of ancient remains suggest the populations who use these points share a deep ancestral connection with groups in ancient Siberia. This strongly supports the theory that the ancestors of the first Americans carried this knowledge with them as they crossed the Bering Land Bridge, a migrating population bringing not just their genes, but their entire technological repertoire into a new world. This leads to a profound reflection. If we now have concrete evidence that people were moving across vast distances in prehistory, carrying with them the genetic blueprints for their physical being, is it not logical that they also carried the intellectual blueprints for their world? They moved with their languages, their stories of flood and creation, their methods for tracking the stars, and their hard-won knowledge of how to fit stone to stone. The genetic map may be the ultimate ledger of these journeys, the biological substrate upon which the network of ideas was built. It suggests that the diffusion of knowledge was not an abstract process, but was often literally embodied, carried in the minds and hands of people as they walked, sailed, and settled new land. This biological thread weaves directly into another carrier of ancient thought, one that travels not in the cell but on the tongue, in the very structure of the words we speak. The word for copper echoes across millennia, from the river valleys of ancient Sumer to the proto-languages of southern India. In Sumerian, it was Urdu. In Proto-Dravidian, the ancestral language of much of South India, a similar word appears, Yoroku. This is no simple coincidence of sound. It is a linguistic fossil, a preserved fragment of a deep-time conversation about metal. This is the power of historical linguistics, a field that listens to the echoes in words to reconstruct the invisible highways of ancient knowledge. linguists like Dr. Asko Parpola, who has spent decades studying the links between the Indus Valley script and Dravidian languages, use these echoes to map forgotten connections. They search for a special category of term known as Wanderwörter, German for wandering words. These are loan words that travel not in isolation, but as part of a technological package, hitchhiking with the revolutionary materials and tools they name. When a new, superior material like tin bronze enters a region, the word for it often arrives with the material itself, borrowed from the traders or smiths who introduced it. This creates a trail of breadcrumbs in vocabulary. We can trace this with foundational technologies. Consider the word for axe, a tool essential for clearing land, shaping timber, and working stone. Across the vast Indo-European language family, from English axe to Sanskrit asi, we find a shared root suggesting this crucial tool and its name spread with the early speakers. Similarly, the plumb line, that simple weighted string that defines true vertical, is fundamental to monumental architecture. The ancient Egyptian term for it was related to a word meaning to be straight or true, a concept so vital its linguistic footprint appears in other Afro-Asiatic languages. Even the humble brick has a story. The Latin word later, meaning brick, shares an intriguing link with the Greek plinthos, hinting at a shared Mediterranean construction vocabulary that moved with the artisans themselves. Perhaps the most telling Wanderwort of all is the word for the very system that enabled this exchange, the navy. The English word navy, the French navire, and the Sanskrit nav all descend from a common Proto-Indo-European root, revealing how central seafaring was to the identity and expansion of those ancient cultures. A stunning illustrative case is the word for silk. This precious fabric originated in China, and the Chinese word seed traveled west along the trade routes. In Greek it became sericon, in Latin sericum, giving us the word sericulture. The product and its name moved together, a clear marker of cultural and technological transfer. So we must ask a pivotal question. If the word for a revolutionary material like copper or silk travels across continents, does the deep knowledge of its use, the associated crafts of smelting, weaving, or dyeing, follow closely behind? It is highly likely. A trader does not just hand over a lump of bronze or a bolt of cloth. He explains what it is, how it was made, and often the specialized vocabulary that comes with it. The linguistic evidence weaves a parallel thread to the genetic and archaeological records, suggesting dense, interactive networks. Yet these threads must be weighed carefully against the dominant academic paradigm, which often emphasizes independent invention. Linguists caution that similar-sounding words can arise by chance or through very ancient, hard-to-trace connections. The case of Yorudu and Yoruku is suggestive, not conclusive. But when multiple lines of evidence begin to align, when the words for copper, axes, and ships show patterns of movement that match the spread of megaliths and the flow of genetic markers, a compelling picture solidifies. It is a picture of a talkative ancient world, where knowledge was carried not just in the mind but on the tongue, embedded in the very names for the tools that built civilization. This cumulative evidence from stones, bones, and now words points us toward a profound realization about the nature of ancient innovation itself. A university lecture hall holds a different kind of echo. Here, a professor stands before a map of the ancient world, its continents separated by wide blue oceans, and states with academic certainty, civilizations developed in isolation. This is the independent invention paradigm, the dominant framework in archaeology for over a century. It argues for polygenesis, the idea that human cultures, like biological species, can evolve similar complex traits entirely separately, driven by universal human needs and environmental pressures. It is a perspective of profound respect for human ingenuity, championed by scholars like the late Dr. David Kelly, who argued that attributing similarities to contact often underestimates the innovative power of the human mind. This view is not a stubborn denial, but a model built on a powerful principle: convergent cultural evolution. Just as wings evolved independently in birds, bats, and insects, so too can architectural forms, social structures, and technologies emerge in parallel. The logic is compelling. Faced with the same fundamental challenge, such as how to build a permanent, imposing structure that reaches toward the heavens, what is the most stable form? A wide base that narrows as it rises, a pyramid. It is the logical outcome of stacking stone without modern reinforcement. Similarly, the need to record transactions and kingship in a growing state almost inevitably leads to symbolic notation, which crystallizes into writing in Mesopotamia, China, and Mesoamerica. The universal requirement to feed a dense population demands the management of water, leading independently to canals in Sumer and chinampas in Mexico. The list of parallel inventions is long and undeniable: agriculture sprouting in at least 7 regions worldwide, pottery crafted on nearly every continent, metallurgy discovered and refined in both the Old World and the Americas. The strength of this paradigm lies in its elegant simplicity. It sees human history as a series of brilliant, local experiments, each culture a closed laboratory solving the grand equations of survival and meaning. This leads to a pivotal, reflective question for us. In our deep desire to see a connected, communicative ancient world, are we projecting a modern, globalized sensibility onto the past? Are we, in a sense, romanticizing history, unable to accept that our ancestors could have been so brilliantly inventive in their isolation? Or conversely, does an over-reliance on independent invention as the default explanation risk underestimating our ancestors' curiosity, their capacity for long-distance travel, and their hunger for exchange? This is the heart of the scholarly debate, a tension between two valid ways of seeing our shared past. To move beyond this stalemate of interpretation, we must turn to a tool that promises to cut through conjecture, a modern science that analyzes the very atoms of the ancient world. A laser pulse travels at the speed of light, striking the weathered surface of a limestone block at Angkor Wat and returning a point of pure data. Half a world away, another pulse does the same at the base of the Great Pyramid. This is not science fiction, but the new frontier of digital archaeology, where light itself is building perfect, immortal copies of our ancient past. Technologies like LiDAR, which uses lasers to map landscapes through dense jungle canopy, and photogrammetry, which stitches thousands of photographs into precise 3-dimensional models, are revolutionizing our ability to see. They allow us to measure with sub-millimeter accuracy, to compare structures separated by oceans as if they were side by side on a laboratory table. Initiatives like Global Explorer even crowdsource this analysis, allowing anyone with an internet connection to scan satellite imagery for hidden sites, transforming the public into a global team of discovery. This digital toolkit provides something historians have long sought: an objective, quantitative method to test the knowledge network hypothesis. We are no longer reliant on subjective visual comparisons. We can now run the numbers. The power lies in comparative analysis at an unimaginable scale. Advanced algorithms can process these 3-dimensional datasets, searching for statistically significant matches in construction signatures that the human eye might miss. Researchers can analyze block-size distribution across an entire site, creating a fingerprint of quarrying and logistics. They can compare the precise angles of stone joints, the depth and pattern of tooling marks left by chisels, and the microscopic wear on drill holes. Consider the illustrative example of obelisk quarrying. By creating detailed 3-dimensional models of the extraction beds at Aswan in Egypt, and comparing the tool marks and failed attempts to similar sites elsewhere, researchers can look for shared technological sequences, the specific steps and mistakes of a common school of thought? Were they using the same method for inserting wooden wedges and soaking them to split the granite? The digital record preserves every detail. We can ask new, profound questions with this big data approach. Can algorithmic pattern recognition identify a signature style of dressing a cornerstone that appears in both the Andes and the Mediterranean? Does the astronomical alignment of a Mesoamerican pyramid fall within the same narrow tolerance as one in Cambodia, suggesting a shared standard of precision? These tools also reveal the environmental intelligence embedded in designs. LiDAR scans of Maya cities show how their networks of reservoirs and causeways were intricately tuned to the local hydrology, a mastery of place that could be compared to water management systems in ancient India or Persia. The technology allows us to see the ancient builder not just as an artist or a priest, but as a systems engineer working with the grain of the land. This digital lens offers a neutral ground in the great debate between isolation and connection. It seeks evidence, not assertion. It looks for the subtle, repeatable fingerprints in the stone that whisper of a shared teacher, a transferred blueprint, or a parallel path to genius. Yet, even as we scan the surfaces of monuments with light, we must also listen to what they have long been telling us in a language of vibration and resonance, a hidden acoustic layer that guided their very form. The ultimate teacher was not a guild or a king, but the world itself. Ancient builders were master observers, their greatest innovations often born from a deep, patient study of the natural systems around them. This is biomimicry, a modern term defined by biologist Janine Benyus as the conscious emulation of nature's genius. She notes that nature has been solving complex problems of design, engineering, and sustainability for billions of years, and ancient cultures were perhaps our first and most intuitive biomimicry students. Their monuments were not imposed upon the landscape, but were often profound dialogues with it, drawing structural wisdom directly from animal architecture, plant patterns, and the very bones of the earth. Consider the simple, brilliant termite. In the hot savanna, a termite mound maintains a remarkably stable internal climate, cool and humid, while outside temperatures soar. It achieves this through a sophisticated network of internal ventilation shafts that channel breezes and regulate airflow. Now look at the Great Pyramid of Giza. Deep within its core, narrow shafts, long thought to be symbolic star shafts, also align with precise cardinal directions. Some researchers, like engineer John D. Bush, have proposed they functioned as a giant ventilation system, using the temperature difference between the pyramid's interior and the desert air to create a convective draft, constantly refreshing the air in the burial chambers. This is not an isolated insight. 1,000 years later and a continent away, Persian architects designed wind catchers, tall, chimney-like towers that captured even the faintest breeze, funneling cool air down into buildings and drawing warm air out, a passive cooling system directly inspired by the same principles of thermal dynamics observed in nature. Parallels suggest a universal curriculum written in wind and stone. This learning extended to the plant kingdom. The growth pattern of leaves around a stem, known as phyllotaxis, follows the Fibonacci sequence to maximize sunlight exposure. This same efficient, spiraling pattern appears in the layout of temple complexes and even in the decorative motifs of columns. The classic lotus column of ancient Egypt is a direct homage, its capital shaped like the closed bud of a lotus flower, a symbol of rebirth drawn from the Nile's ecology. Even the mighty arch, a cornerstone of global architecture, finds its inspiration in nature. The simple rock formation of a natural bridge, created by erosion, demonstrated the principle of compressive strength, how a curved structure could channel immense weight down its sides to stable foundations. Observing this, human builders replicated the form, first in stone, then in brick, creating spans that could support incredible loads. This environmental intelligence reached its zenith in the face of one of nature's most destructive forces, the earthquake. In the seismic zones of the Andes and Japan, ancient engineers developed remarkably similar solutions, not by copying each other, but by copying the behavior of the Earth itself. The Inca built their polygonal walls with a slight inward tilt and used trapezoidal shapes for doors and windows, a design that makes a structure more stable under lateral shaking. Crucially, they often set their foundations on beds of gravel or sand. During a tremor, these layers would shift and settle, absorbing and dissipating the energy before it could travel up and crack the rigid stonework above. In Japan, traditional wooden pagodas, some over 1,000 years old, survived tremors that flatten modern buildings. Their secret is a central, massive pillar called a shinbashira, which is not firmly anchored to the ground or the upper floors. During an earthquake, the flexible wooden frame sways around this independent, pendulous core, much like a tree bends in the wind, allowing the structure to move as a fluid, resilient whole. Both cultures arrived at the same profound insight: to build flexibly, to work with the energy of the quake rather than rigidly resist it. This reflection brings us to a pivotal crossroads in our investigation. Does this universal classroom of nature, with its observable laws of physics, biology, and geology, fully explain the global parallels we see? Could intelligent minds everywhere, simply by observing a termite mound, a rock arch, or a swaying tree, independently arrive at the same architectural solutions? It is a powerfully elegant argument. The principles of stability, ventilation, and efficient load-bearing are written plainly in the world for anyone with the patience to see. Yet, a question lingers. While nature provides the textbook, who writes down the lessons? Who develops the specific, repeatable techniques to translate the observation of a flexible tree into the precise joinery of a pagoda, or the concept of a gravel bed into the engineered foundation of Machu Picchu? The observation is the spark, but the sustained application is a craft, a taught and perfected tradition. This realization guides us back from the universal teacher to the human student, to the specific, dedicated groups who became the keepers of this hard-won, practical wisdom, the ones who ensured that nature's blueprints were not just seen, but remembered, refined, and built upon across generations. A master builder's most important tool was not his chisel, but his memory. In a world before widespread writing, the survival of complex engineering knowledge across centuries depended entirely on the human mind, trained through generations to become a living library. This was the realm of oral technical literature, a sophisticated system of preservation that wove mathematics, astronomy, and construction codes into the very fabric of culture. Anthropologists studying Aboriginal Australian songlines have documented this phenomenon with awe. These intricate narratives, sung across the landscape, encode precise navigational routes, geological features, and resource locations across thousands of miles, forming an accurate and enduring map of the continent held entirely in memory. This demonstrates a universal human capacity, the ability to preserve vast, precise information not on parchment, but through patterned sound and sacred repetition. The methods used were brilliantly practical, turning abstract data into unforgettable experiences. Complex geometric ratios or astronomical sequences were set to rhythmic chants, their meter and rhyme acting as a cognitive scaffold. The very act of using a tool became a kinesthetic lesson, a dance of the body that taught leverage, angle, and force. A young apprentice would learn the correct swing of a hammer not from a manual, but by mimicking the master's movements for years, the technique becoming muscle memory. Most powerfully, technical data was embedded within the grand narratives of myth and genealogy. The story of a god measuring the heavens with a cord was not just a creation tale, it was the preservation of surveying principles. A genealogy listing 50 ancestors was also a chronological record, a way of marking time and legitimizing the knowledge passed down that specific lineage. We see this living transmission across the globe. In Polynesia, navigators memorized immense star charts, wave pattern sequences, and bird migration paths through chants that could take a lifetime to master, enabling them to find tiny islands in the vast Pacific. In West Africa, griots, the revered oral historians, preserved the histories of empires, legal precedents, and the lineages of craftsmen, acting as the custodians of societal and technical identity. Perhaps the most stunning example comes from India with the Vedas. These ancient Sanskrit hymns, composed over 3,000 years ago, were preserved orally with such extreme precision that recitations today remain phonetically identical across continents. This was achieved through a redundant, multi-layered system of memorization, where the text was learned in multiple orders and patterns, creating a fail-safe against corruption. The Vedas are not just spiritual texts, they are a monumental testament to the power of disciplined oral tradition to safeguard complexity. This leads us to a profound and haunting question. If individual cultures could preserve such vast technical libraries through song and story, could a globally shared core of oral knowledge have existed in deep antiquity? Could the foundational principles of sacred geometry, megalithic construction, and celestial alignment have once been part of a common curriculum, transmitted not in stone first, but in verse, carried by the first migrating builders and navigators? It is a compelling thought that the echoes we see in stone might be the solidified remnants of an older, living conversation held in memory. Yet this very system, this intangible heritage of sung knowledge and embodied skill, now faces an unprecedented threat. The force that once shaped the environments our ancestors so brilliantly adapted to is now changing them too quickly for tradition to keep pace. The greatest danger to this ancient network of memory comes from the same global force that once may have connected its creators, the relentless and accelerating transformation of our world's climate. The ground beneath a civilization can turn to dust. A prolonged drought does not merely wither crops, it unravels the very social contract, forcing communities to make impossible choices. In this harsh light, climate events throughout history emerge not simply as destroyers, but as dynamic, often brutal, engines for the redistribution of human knowledge. When the rains fail and the granaries empty, people move. And when those people include master builders, irrigation engineers, or astronomer priests, they carry their most vital asset with them, their expertise. A displaced community of skilled stonemasons might arrive at the gates of a distant, water-rich city, offering to build impregnable walls in exchange for sanctuary and sustenance. This trade of knowledge for survival became a powerful mechanism for technological diffusion, turning periods of crisis into eras of unexpected cultural fusion. Paleoclimatologists like Dr. Harvey Weiss have meticulously documented these turning points. His work on the 4.2 kiloyear event, a severe aridification period that gripped regions from the Mediterranean to the Indus Valley around 2200 BC, provides a stark blueprint. This mega-drought, evidenced in ice cores and sediment layers, coincides almost precisely with the collapse of the Akkadian Empire in Mesopotamia, the end of the Old Kingdom in Egypt, and the depopulation of great cities in the Indus Valley. Weiss argues this was not a coincidence but a catalyst, stating that climate change was the proximate cause for the collapse of urban, agricultural, and political systems. As these centralized powers fragmented, their specialized artisans were set adrift, becoming nodes of knowledge in search of new patrons. We can trace this pattern across continents and millennia. The enigmatic movement of the Sea Peoples, often framed as a sudden invasion, may have been, in part, a desperate migration triggered by crop failures and famine in their homelands, a climate refugee crisis of the late Bronze Age. Their arrival, while destructive, also seeded new hybrid cultures along the Levantine coast. Similarly, in the American Southwest, the gradual dispersal of the ancestral pueblones from great centers like Mesa Verde and Choco Canyon was driven by a decades-long drought in the 13th century. As they migrated south and east, they carried their advanced dry farming techniques, their celestial calendar, and their distinctive pueblo architecture, influencing the cultures they joined. An illustrative and poignant case is the end of the Greenland Norse. For centuries, these Scandinavian settlers maintained a European way of life on the edge of the Arctic. Then, as the Little Ice Age descended, their climate grew colder, sea ice increased, cutting off trade, and their farming practices failed. They clung to their traditions, refusing to adopt the successful hunting technologies of the neighboring Inuit. The community eventually vanished, and with it, a unique repository of knowledge adapted to a high-latitude environment was lost. This story highlights the dual edge of climate-driven change. It can force fruitful exchange, or it can lead to tragic isolation and erasure. This historical view challenges us to see so-called dark ages not as voids, but as periods of intense reorganization, where old networks broke and new ones formed under the pressure of a changing sky. It also prompts a profound reflection for our own time. As we face a modern era of accelerated climate change, are we witnessing a similar, urgent global exchange? Today, it is not stonemasons but engineers and scientists sharing green technologies, solar designs, and water conservation strategies across borders at a breathtaking pace. The ancient pattern repeats: knowledge flows where survival demands it. This realization shifts our gaze from isolated monuments to the living, breathing, and migrating minds that built them, minds that could envision structures to last for ages, yet were themselves subject to the impermanent climate. To understand the full scope of their vision, we must now look beyond the practical and into the philosophical, to the core belief that drove them to build not for decades, but for millennia, the concept of deep time. The fall of Rome did not plunge the world into silence. Instead, it scattered a brilliant mosaic, its pieces finding new homes in quiet, determined hands. This is the vital re-evaluation of what we call the Dark Ages, a period better understood not as an erasure of knowledge, but as its profound transformation and stubborn preservation. Historian Brian Ward Perkins reminds us that while the grand political and economic unity of the empire fractured, the practical knowledge of how to build, to craft, and to calculate did not simply vanish. It persisted, often in fragmented, localized networks that would later recoalesce into new and powerful forms. The key is to shift our thinking from collapse to consolidation. Imagine the monastic scriptorium, a hushed room lit by candlelight. Here, monks meticulously copied not only religious texts, but the works of Plato, Aristotle, and the engineering manuals of Vitruvius. Each copied page was an act of defiance against oblivion, a node in a fragile but enduring network of preservation. Meanwhile, outside the monastery walls, local builders were not starting from scratch. They looked at the crumbling Roman aqueducts and villas, and they adapted. They salvaged the perfectly cut stones, they studied the Roman arch, and they applied its principles to new churches and fortifications, blending old techniques with emerging styles. This was not a loss, but a translation of knowledge into a new context. The survival of technical expertise relied on specific, resilient institutions. In the East, the Byzantine Empire maintained imperial workshops where the secrets of mosaic art, dome construction, and fine metallurgy were guarded and passed down. Far to the south and east, following the rise of Islam, magnificent centers of learning like the House of Wisdom in Baghdad became global hubs. Scholars from diverse backgrounds gathered to translate Greek, Persian, and Indian texts into Arabic, synthesizing and advancing knowledge in mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. This was not an isolated renaissance, it was a direct conduit preserving and enhancing the classical legacy. Later, in medieval Europe, the craft guilds emerged as the new custodians of practical knowledge. These were closed societies of masons, glassworkers, and metalsmiths who protected their trade secrets through rigorous apprenticeships. The knowledge of how to mix a durable mortar, how to forge a stronger steel blade, or how to calculate the load of a vault was encoded in rituals and hands-on training, ensuring its survival from one generation to the next. Look at the technologies that not only persisted but were refined during these centuries. The recipe for Roman concrete was largely lost in the West, but the engineering principle of the arch and dome flourished. The magnificent dome of the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, built in the 6th century, was a direct evolution of Roman technique, pushing the form to breathtaking new scales. This knowledge of dome construction would later travel, influencing the grand mosques of the Islamic world. In Northern Europe, artisans perfected the art of stained glass, transforming sunlight into divine narrative. Monks in monasteries, tracking the hours for prayer, developed increasingly sophisticated mechanical clocks, marrying celestial observation with intricate gearwork. So we must ask a pivotal question: do we consistently underestimate the resilience of practical knowledge? It appears that the most useful, most foundational techniques possess a stubborn inertia. They outlive empires because they are carried in the skilled hands of the carpenter, the memorized recipes of the alchemist, and the precise eye of the master mason. This resilience is the very bedrock for understanding the most tantalizing and enduring mystery of all: the possibility that certain core principles of building and cosmic order were preserved across not just centuries, but across the rise and fall of entire worlds, hidden in plain sight within the very fabric of sacred geometry and celestial myth. Certain stones whisper of a timeline far older than our textbooks allow. We have traced the threads of trade, migration, and shared observation, building a case for a connected ancient world. Yet a final, profound question remains, one that pushes at the very edges of conventional history. What if the knowledge network we see linking distant builders was not the beginning, but a remnant? What if its origins lie in a forgotten epoch, a chapter of human achievement erased by time and cataclysm? This is the ultimate enigma, the hypothesis of a lost advanced civilization. It is not a claim we will prove, but a thought experiment that forces us to re-examine the very pace of human innovation. The idea, popularized by writers like Graham Hancock, suggests that key geometric, astronomical, and engineering principles were discovered not in the familiar cradles of Egypt or Sumer, but in a much older, perhaps global culture that flourished after the last ice age. According to this view, the monuments we marvel at are not the first attempts of fledgling societies, but the legacy work of survivors, carrying forward fragments of a much more sophisticated science. The argument hinges on anomalies, artifacts, and sites that seem inexplicably advanced for their accepted dates. Take Göbekli Tepe in modern Turkey, a sprawling complex of massive, T-shaped stone pillars carved with intricate animal reliefs. Archaeologists date its construction to around 9,600 BC, a time when humanity was supposedly comprised of small, nomadic hunter-gatherer groups. The scale and artistry of the site shatter that image, suggesting a level of social organization and symbolic thought that mainstream models struggle to explain. How did these early people quarry, transport, and erect multi-ton stones without metal tools or even pottery? Proponents of the older knowledge theory argue it is a clue, a footprint of a pre-existing technical tradition. Another persistent anomaly lies in ancient cartography. The Piri Reis map of 1513, compiled by an Ottoman admiral from older source charts, famously shows the coastline of Antarctica without its ice cap, a feat of surveying thought impossible until modern satellite radar. While scholars offer various explanations, including speculative reconstruction, it fuels the question, Could some maps be copies of copies, preserving geographic knowledge from an era when sea levels were different and now submerged lands were charted? The most iconic and heated debate centers on the Great Sphinx of Giza. Geologist Dr. Robert M. Schoch observed vertical weathering patterns on the Sphinx enclosure walls, patterns he argues are characteristic of prolonged heavy rainfall erosion, not wind and sand. Since the hyper-arid climate of Egypt has prevailed for only the last 5,000 years, Schoch suggests the Sphinx's core structure could be thousands of years older, carved during a wetter period perhaps as far back as 7,000 to 9,000 BC. This would place its origins in a shadowy pre-dynastic time. Mainstream Egyptology offers robust rebuttals to each point. They argue that the hunter-gatherers at Göbekli Tepe could have achieved their work through large-scale communal effort over centuries, a testament to the power of shared belief rather than inherited technology. The Piri Reis map, they note, contains glaring inaccuracies and is likely a composite of Portolan charts and speculative guesswork, not a precise relic of antediluvian surveyors. Regarding the Sphinx, other geologists contend that the weathering patterns can be explained by groundwater seepage, salt exfoliation, or the effects of wind-driven rain in occasional wet periods within the known timeline. The debate, often fierce, is less about individual facts and more about a paradigm, a threshold of possibility. Does our model of human progress have the flexibility to accommodate sudden, inexplicable leaps? Or must anomalies eventually force us to reconsider the timeline itself? This brings us to a reflective crossroads, one that transcends the specific controversy. Whether you see the hand of a lost civilization or the staggering, innate genius of humanity repeatedly rediscovering its potential, the evidence we have walked through demands a common conclusion. Our past was not a series of isolated lights flickering in disconnected valleys. It was a constellation, a pattern of communication, exchange, and shared inspiration far more vibrant and interconnected than we ever knew. The stones, the stars, and the stories all tell the same tale. We have always been a species that learns, shares, and builds upon the discoveries of others, across any distance the world could place between us. That constellation of connections we have traced across the ancient world does more than rewrite a timeline. It rewires our sense of self. A world history textbook where the chapters on Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, and Mesoamerica are not isolated columns, but woven together by arrows of influence and exchange, creates a fundamentally different story. This is not just an academic adjustment. It is a profound cultural and philosophical shift with deep implications for our modern identity. Accepting the reality of widespread ancient knowledge networks directly challenges the Eurocentric and isolationist narratives that have long framed our past. For centuries, the dominant historical view presented civilization as a torch passed in a linear relay from Mesopotamia to Greece to Rome, and then to Western Europe, with other cultures appearing as separate, often lesser, sparks in the dark. This new tapestry, however, shows the light was never held by one runner alone. It was a shared glow illuminating a global conversation, as the late researcher Dr. John Anthony West passionately argued, we are in desperate need of a paradigm shift, a complete reorientation in how we view human origins and capabilities. He saw the rigid adherence to a slow, linear progression of history not as fact, but as a dogma that blinds us to the evidence of a more sophisticated, interconnected past. Embracing this interconnectedness fosters a more holistic, global understanding of human achievement. It allows us to see the Great Pyramid not as a mysterious Egyptian fluke, but as a pinnacle of a technical tradition that may have drawn from and contributed to a wider pool of knowledge. It lets us appreciate the Maya calendar not as an isolated marvel of indigenous genius, but as part of a worldwide human obsession with measuring cosmic cycles. This perspective can cultivate a powerful sense of shared human heritage, a recognition that our ancestors, regardless of the continent they called home, were participating in the same grand project of deciphering the universe and leaving a mark upon the earth. In doing so, it subtly undermines cultural chauvinism, the belief in the inherent superiority of one's own cultural lineage. If innovation was a networked phenomenon, then no single modern nation or people can claim sole ancestral credit for the foundations of science, mathematics, or engineering. Our collective modern world is built on a truly collective ancient foundation. This shift is already reshaping scholarship in tangible ways. For decades, the narrative of classical Greece presented it as a miraculous, pure birth of Western reason. Today, a growing body of research acknowledges the profound African and Near Eastern influences on Greek philosophy, mathematics, and art. Scholars now trace the roots of Greek thought through Egypt and Mesopotamia, recognizing a flow of ideas that enriched what would become the Hellenic world. This is not about diminishing Greek achievement, but about properly contextualizing it within the vibrant exchange of its time, giving a more honest and complete picture of how knowledge actually grows through connection and synthesis. Yet, this exciting revisioning is not without its risks. We must guard against a shallow romanticism that glosses over the very real differences, conflicts, and unique cultural expressions of ancient societies. Seeing connections should not erase distinct identities. There is also the danger of appropriation, where well-meaning but oversimplified theories are used to strip specific cultural achievements from their rightful heirs, claiming them for some vague, lost global source. The goal is not to create a bland, uniform past, but to appreciate a diverse, talkative one, where cultures adapted shared ideas into stunningly unique forms. So we are left with a reflective question that points not just to the past, but to the future. If we begin to see our history as a story of long-distance collaboration and shared intellectual struggle, does that inspire us to build a more collaborative tomorrow? The ancient networks show us that barriers of language and geography were not absolute, that a desire to understand the stars or build something lasting could create dialogues across vast divides. In a modern world facing global challenges, from climate shifts to resource management, perhaps the most practical lesson from these builders is not in their stonework, but in their implicit belief that knowledge is a currency meant to circulate, to be tested and improved by many minds. To build a resilient future, we might just need to rediscover that ancient connective instinct. The same principles that raised pyramids could now help us build a future that lasts. Across the globe, modern architects and engineers are looking back, not for nostalgia, but for a forgotten operating manual. They are rediscovering the ancient builders' most powerful legacy, not a specific stone technique, but a profound ethos of shared, open-source problem-solving. This was a world where a solution for moving megaliths in Malta might inspire a temple foundation in Mycenae, where a water filtration method from Tikal could be adapted in a Persian Khanate. That collaborative spirit, that willingness to learn from any source and adapt it to local needs, is perhaps the most vital lesson we can reclaim. Imagine a modern, global guild of sustainability experts, a digital network where an architect in Norway shares a design for passive solar heating inspired by ancestral Puebloan cliff dwellings, while an engineer in Bangladesh adapts ancient Roman concrete recipes using local volcanic ash to create flood-resistant foundations. This is not science fiction, it is the logical next step in a conversation that began millennia ago. The ancients practiced a form of open-source knowledge long before the term existed. Their blueprints were not patented, they were embedded in the very stones they left behind, in the oral traditions of guilds, and in the universal language of geometry. Today, we see a powerful echo of this in movements like collaborative science and open-access data sharing, where researchers across continents publish findings freely, accelerating solutions to global health and environmental crises. The ancient model offers us specific, actionable wisdom. First, the value of the interdisciplinary team. The master builders were never just engineers, they were priest astronomers, artist mathematicians, and geologist philosophers all in one. They understood that a true solution harmonized practical need with celestial rhythm, structural integrity with sacred meaning. Today, tackling a challenge like climate-resilient housing demands that same synthesis, bringing together material scientists, climatologists, sociologists, and local indigenous knowledge holders into a single, focused conversation. Second, we must relearn the art of the long-term planning cycle. The Maya did not build for a single lifetime. They constructed in 52-year calendar rounds, layering their temples in rhythm with cosmic time. Our modern quarterly report mindset is ill-suited for challenges that unfold over centuries. We need to reinstate the visionary patience of the cathedral builders, who knew they would not see the spire completed, but laid the foundation for generations they would never meet. Third, and perhaps most crucially, is the principle of designing with the land, not against it. Ancient builders were masterful listeners. They used local stone-oriented structures to harness prevailing winds for cooling and shaped their cities to the existing hydrology. This is the essence of true sustainability, a deep biomimicry that asks, how would nature solve this? Modern eco-architecture is already embracing this. The Earthship biotecture movement, for instance, creates fully self-sufficient homes using recycled materials like tires and bottles packed with earth for thermal mass, harvesting their own water and energy, and regulating temperature through passive solar design. It is a direct, conscious application of ancient principles, a modern vernacular built from ancient wisdom, so we arrive at the final, reflective question of our entire journey. Having traced these luminous threads of connection across oceans and epochs, can we now consciously reactivate that global builder network? Our 21st century crises, from rising seas to resource scarcity, are the modern equivalent of the droughts and seismic shifts our ancestors faced. They responded not with isolation but with shared innovation, with knowledge carried across deserts and oceans. Our tools are faster, our maps more precise, but the essential human task remains the same: to build shelters of wisdom that can weather the coming storms. The stones have been speaking to us all along, not just about who we were, but about who we could choose to become. A species that remembers how to learn together, across every border, real or imagined. The echoes of that conversation are still with us. From the echoing chambers of Maltese tombs to the silent, star-aligned plains of Nazca, we have traced the faint but persistent threads of a story far grander than any single monument. The evidence is a mosaic, each piece a clue. We have seen shared geometric codes whispered in stone, identical astronomical alignments etched into temple foundations, and the tangible pathways of migrants and materials that could have carried these ideas across continents. This does not point to a single, secret society ruling the ancient world, but to something more profound, a vast, slow-motion conversation. It was a knowledge network woven from the practical threads of trade, the desperate journeys of migration, the enduring power of myth, and a universal, shared gaze at the heavens. For generations, the dominant story was one of isolation, of brilliant cultures blooming alone in disconnected valleys. That story is no longer tenable. The walls between these ancient worlds were porous, not impermeable. Ideas flowed with the currents, were carried on the backs of camels along silk roads, and were preserved in the sacred chants of oral traditions. This revelation does not diminish the genius of the Inca stonemason or the Egyptian architect. It elevates it. It shows us a species whose greatest instinct beyond survival is to connect. To share a discovery, to improve upon a design, to pass a story from one generation to the next and from one shore to another. This changes everything. It invites us to look at our shared history with new eyes, to see the familiar monuments not as endpoints, but as waypoints in a much longer, more collaborative human journey. The true legacy of these ancient builders is not locked in their stones, but lives on in that very impulse, the collaborative pursuit of wonder that drives us to look up at the same stars and ask the same questions. If this exploration has shifted your perspective, we would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Consider subscribing for more journeys into the unknown as we continue together to unravel the magnificent mystery